What's up, everybody? It is Jordan here from Wednesday Night Warhammer, and this Tyranid Tactics video is going to be talking about all about our bugs going up against a very tough meta, pun intended. There's lots of really beefy knights out there. Death Guard is stinky and also resilient as well, and I'm going to talk through a couple strategies and a couple of mindsets that we should use as Tyranid players when we are approaching a meta that is so strong and maybe lopsided as it is right now. Talking about the meta right now, currently, there's three armies to me that are really sticking out as kind of menaces and boogeymen of the meta. The first one is Imperial Knights. They have a very high toughness skew, they have large wound count, and with an army-wide 6-up feel no pain, they are very durable and very tough to kill. In addition to that, they have a very high OC. So what they've created is an army that is very hard to kill, very hard to shift from the battlefield. And then in addition, it's hard to remove their models, and it is also hard to remove their primary score because they can just tow knights on to the objectives, and they have a whole bunch of OC with a very small model count. It's very difficult to deal with, and those are kind of the reasons why Imperial Knights are arguably one of the best factions in the game right now. In addition, their codex got delayed. There's a lot of rumors on the internet. I'm not going to bother saying any of them because they're rumors. But the point of the matter is they were probably supposed to come out alongside Chaos Knights because that's normally how they release things. And so we don't have a codex. So there could be a thing where some of their data sheets are supposed to be balanced alongside rules that are different in the codex. And Games Workshop did a thing where they half released the codex by releasing the new data sheets, but didn't change the detachment rule. I'm not sure what happened with that, but I think it has caused a perfect storm for Imperial Knights just to be ridiculously strong. So that's kind of why they are sitting where they are. Chaos Knights next is a very similar thing as Imperial Knights. They have a high toughness skew, of course, because they're knights. There's a large wound count and very high OC. In addition, both of these factions that I forgot to mention is their points got reduced by quite a bit. So you will see very competitive lists with, I think Imperial Knights often runs 3 big knights or 4 big knights, like some Atroposes and Canis Rex, where Chaos Knights can just run a slew of different knights. I think 4 big knights or 5 big knights is not an uncommon sight to see. And that can be very tough into a whole lot of different armies if they're not prepared to tackle the high toughness and the very high wound count that both of these armies have. And then I think, again, to reiterate, the nail in the coffin is the very high OC that both of these factions have. The ability for them to just stand on points and not be killed for turns on turns and just hold primary without people committing almost half their army sometimes into killing one unit is very difficult to deal with. And last but not least is Death Guard, which is a kind of a similar problem, but also very different. They're very durable. They're very efficient. Some people are saying a lot of their points costs are a little bit on the low end. I don't want to doom and gloom and make people grab pitchforks. So I do think that their drones and some other things could go up just a little bit in points. I think a lot of lists are just taking 9 of the different drones. You have the fart carts, and then you have the lawnmower guys, and then the blight launchers, who are basically like mini exocrines. A lot of lists just have 9 of those, and it doesn't really matter what detachment you're playing into. They just take as many of those as possible, and it ends up being a very efficient, very strong army. In addition, the Death Shroud Terminators with the 6-inch charge, that's a very strong ability. I don't think anyone's going to deny that. In fact, with Mortarian's Hammer, which is one of the stronger detachments for Death Guard has access to, can just point and click at something and say that you're in contagion range, so my Death Shroud can get a 6-inch charge off you. That's very strong. I'm not going to say that any of these factions, should not exist anymore, or they should absolutely get obliterated. I'm just pointing out the facts that these are the reasons why these armies are sitting around in the top place of meta, and will most likely stay there unless there are changes that are made. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of the rest of the video, I just do want to make sure that you are aware that we are doing an incredible giveaway with our friends at Secondhand Geek. We're giving away 3 Norn emissaries new in box. So if you're an assimilator fan, you can also make it a simulator. All you need to do is click our affiliate link down below and list a Warhammer item for sale on Secondhand Geek by tonight. Tonight is the last night to try and enter this giveaway, and then you have a chance at winning a Norn emissary or assimilator. We are giving away 3, but we are making sure that we're going to give them away to 3 different participants within this giveaway. That's it. That's all the info. And, subscribe to support the channel. All right, let's move on to the meat and potatoes of our meta. When you are approaching any competitive game in Warhammer 40k, regardless of the meta, I think you need to answer one very, very important question, and it is, what is your faction good at? Here we talk a lot about Tyranids, so what are Tyranids good at? And we need to first establish that before we address any meta changes or adapting to the meta at all. The number one thing that Tyranids are good at is board control. I think that's true for the entire edition for Tyranids, is they do a very good job of being in places that they need to be, not allowing your opponent to be in places that they want to be, and then scoring points off of those 2 things. And that is for a number of reasons. We have a large amount of fast-moving OC bombs like gargoyles. I love gargoyles so much, and you guys know that, as well as Hormagaunts. And in addition to just having large amount of OC that can go onto objectives and take people off primary, etc., we have powerful lone op units that can maybe do the same thing, or maybe just put up some early pressure in order to move block and not let people get to places in the board that they would like to. Those are like, of course, Lictors, Neurolictors, Von Ryan's Leapers even. I like them because of their larger footprint with 3 models in the squad as opposed to just 1. And then Death Leaper. You can control the board with them by screening out early deep strikes. You can control the board with them by charging skirmishing units and not allowing your opponent to use their scouts or their striking scorpions or whatever it is in order to gain advantage throughout the board. In addition, Tyranids have relatively strong shooting platforms that can back up that early board control. I think Exocrines are still efficient. They do very well into light armor, and they do amazingly into elite infantry and infantry. So including a couple of Exocrines in your list, almost no matter what the detachment is, there's a good chance that that is a good thing to do. In addition, like Maleceptors are pretty strong as well. And then everybody's favorite Casino Cannon, the Rupture effects. With D6 plus 6 damage, it can pop a lot of tanks very easily. And if you get lucky, you can do quite a bit of damage to some of our Knights, which we are definitely concerned about right now. And last but certainly not least, this is like an exciting point for me. I think there's a large variety of detachments that Tyranids have access to that aren't quote unquote solved. And that means that there isn't one list in every single detachment that is like slam dunk. You have to run this list. This is the solved list. If you're not running this list, then you are not 100% optimal. So that allows for us Tyranid players to maybe try out some interesting units that might be good for different strategies and allow for them to shine in a way that maybe some people haven't thought about before. To wrap this all up in a bow, Tyranids very good at being where they want to be when they want to be there. Also, an incredibly important question is, what is your faction bad at? What are Tyranids bad at? I'm just going to state it. The first thing is damage. Tyranids a lot of times have a hard time, killing your opponent's units. I don't think our damage output is as efficient as a lot of other armies. Oftentimes, Tyranids like to stack multiple buffs from multiple, high-costed models in order to kill a one thing. For instance, if I have a Tyranifex that is about to shoot at a unit, I'm probably not shooting at that unit before I also shoot an Exocrine at that unit. So if we're talking about, if it's like a Gladiator Lancer or something, and I think that's 165 points. We first have an Exocrine that shoots at it. That's 140 points. And then I also have a Tyranifex shoot at it. Now, I could gamble and say I'm not going to roll ones, but I would much rather shoot my Exocrine at that target that I know my Tyranifex is also going to shoot at, just to ensure if I do roll a 1, then my Tyranid VS is going to be able to re-roll it. So for instance, we have 340 points of shooting that is committed to a 160 point model. And I know that happens frequently with other factions as well, but I think that that pretty much happens every single time Tyranids activate and shooting, which is tough. And that is something that we definitely struggle with. Another thing that also go alongside with damage is we have relatively low AP. I really appreciate the change that psychophages have, being able to give a buff to AP and melee. It seems pretty strong. I would have wished a little bit that if we had that buff in shooting as well after the psychophage flames, I think that would have been pretty nice. But, we got a buff. I'm not going to complain too much about that. But besides that, across the board, our AP in combat is like 2. I think the Norn assimilator is AP3, maybe. He might still be AP2, but like our Hive Tyrants and our Haruspecs that I have pictured right there, the big attacks being AP2, he's got ginormous lobster claws. AP2 seems a little small for me, in my opinion, as well as the Bone Sword. So that is definitely something that we're lacking at. Again, the Psychophage coming in helps that a little bit, but is not incredible. We have a hard time activating into high toughness / high wound count models. And we've got Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights top of the meta right now. I don't think it's a surprise that Tyranids are not having the greatest time in the competitive scene right now. With that, I don't think it's a coincidence, I think that is clearly what is happening. And last but not least is durability. Anything without an invuln in our entire model range is going to be picked up pretty quickly. Like our T11 Haruspecs is right here. They have a 3-up save. Anything with, honestly, AP2 is going to have a really, really easy time of killing a Haruspecs. And there's a lot of weapons out there with Knights that have AP4 stuff that are just going to automatically delete a Haruspecs. But if you think about it, like if a Haruspecs goes out to punch an Armiger or something of that sort, it is not automatically going to delete that Armiger. So there's a little bit of disparity with that. I don't think that means that Tyranids are terrible by all means. It definitely means that we are going to have to look at our strengths and kind of acknowledge our weaknesses and pivot away from them a little bit. When you are making a list to kind of address the meta, there's a couple of things that I think that are important to acknowledge as opposed to going full in depth triple rupture cannon because high damage kills high wound count models. So don't exactly do that immediately. Think about these things first. You still want your army, I think, to lean into what it is good at. We've talked a lot about board control, of secondaries, etc., movement, and being around, being the spot where you want to be on the board when you want to be there. It's one of Tyranid's best things because of their infiltrate and their fast-moving scoring units like Hormagaunts and Gargoyles. Then you want to adjust to the meta, but you don't want to commit your entire list to it. If you do a very, very hard skew, I think Crusher Stampede is a little bit different than what I'm talking about because like triple Rupture Cannon and Crusher Stampede, that seems pretty cool. That might be good. However, if you're playing something like Vanguard Onslaught, just because Knights are very heavy in the meta right now, that doesn't mean that you want a triple Rupture Cannon because they miss and Knights have invulnerable saves. So if you put your entire game plan into a skewed unit like a Rupture Cannon and it whiffs, and then Canis Rex come out and he doesn't whiff, I will tell you that. And then all of a sudden your meta pick unit is just almost wasted points at that point in time. Now, that is still to say you should have a solid game plan if you're going up against Imperial Knights, Chaos Knights, or even Death Guard with those high toughness. You should have a couple of units that are able to deal with that or mitigate those problems in a certain way. And you need to have a plan going up against them if you are hoping to do well in a competitive scene. And last but arguably still important is understand that there are still other armies that exist in the meta. And if your units that are specifically designed to kill Knights or kill Death Guard or whatever is weak against a certain army, that could be bad, because understand that you are not the only person that is considering these meta picks. And so some people might be meta picking against the meta pick. if that makes sense. There are some armies out there that I think have the tools to deal with the meta armies, and also deal with the choices that people are making in order to give them an advantage against Imperial Knights, Chaos Knights, and Death Guard. So understand, if you're really good into Knights, you're really good into Death Guard, you still might be really bad into Eldar. So that is also a consideration to make, and also kind of leans into, don't stray too far away from what your faction is good at. Board control. I've talked about a lot about board control, and I honestly think that board control is going to be the best way that we fight against those three armies that we talked about at the beginning. Board control is dictating the pace of the game through move blocking and controlling objectives, as well as areas of the table that you need to be at. You can do that by screening out your opponent and not allowing them to move outside of their deployment zone or towards objectives, or even staging. If you have a fast unit that can get up in their face immediately and hold them back for 2 or 3 turns, something like that, that could be very beneficial for your game plan. My buddy Chase, who we went with to ATC, he was playing AdMech, and he was actually on stream last week, I believe. And his whole goal was, put me into Knights. I'm going to use all my Skitarii stuff and run them directly at the Knights, not allow the Knights to move at all, and then defeat them. And Chase did very well into Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights, because it's kind of funny, like AdMech is not an incredible army right now in terms of win rates, but AdMech is very good at that strategy of screening out and blocking Knights or models in general, and that's why they are doing well into Imperial and Chaos Knights in the meta right now. Another thing you can do is controlling the board by staging melee and ranged threat ranges. So I always assume that when I'm playing somebody that they are thinking of the big picture things. And so if I stage a unit like Genestealers behind a ruin, and they have a pretty good threat range, of course, my opponent knows that if they bring out an important unit into the center of the board, anywhere close to those Genestealers, there's a good chance that the Genestealers can come out, kill that unit, and then profit off of that, right? So by staging aggressively with a melee unit, don't give them away, of course, but by staging aggressively with a melee unit and allowing for that melee unit to then later on activate directly into an opponent's important piece, that is another form of controlling the board, because your opponent is not going to want to be directly in front of your Genestealers. They're going to want to protect their units as much as you want to protect your units. In addition, the same goes for ranged threats. If you have a Tyranids that is just going to poke out directly in front of a very large firing lane, so he's threatening getting heavy next turn, and he'll hit on 2s. The Tyranids can be relatively durable, so I'm not sure the opponent is always going to want to step out into the open and allow for the Tyranids to shoot at their unit, because there's a good chance that the Tyranids lives against most things with toughness 12 and that free damage blank. Last but not least, board control is very important for screening out important deep strikes, especially like Death Guard. If a lot of their game plan is about getting Death Shroud Terminators in and getting a 6-inch deep strike charge and then just causing havoc, that's gross, and if you are able to mitigate that and not allow for your opponent to get where they really, really want to be, you could end up on the flip side of that. A couple of techniques in order to help you screen out deep strikes of the 9-inch and the 6-inch deep strike, just both of those in general. The first thing you want to do is, if you're trying to screen out an open area between 2 units, you want to make sure that there is exactly 18 inches between those 2 units. And that means that there's no space in between either of those units for their models to drop, because 9 inches from the Hormagaunts that are right there, of course, and then 9 inches from the Lictor. That means if they're 18 inches directly apart, there's nowhere in the middle for any units to drop. It's just a very easy thing to check when you are finished with your moving. Just spread 18 inches from your tape measure to both of your models and kind of work your way around the table and triple check that there's no sneaky spots that your opponent can drop in. You can use that same method for 12 inches in between units 4, 6-inch deep strike with Death Shroud Terminators, etc. That also projects forward too. So if you are able to aggressively push up like a lictor, it's only on a 50 millimeter base, of course, but that 9 inches actually extends quite a bit from there. So if you're worried about a rapid ingress of something like that, then you can just push your lictor up, and it might push the rapid ingress even further back, and then there's a chance that they don't even want to rapid ingress in that sense. And especially with Death Shroud Terminators, remember, they can only 6-inch deep strike against you if you are within contagion range. So if there's any way for you to mitigate that during your movement and check where your contagion range is going to be next turn during your opponent's movement, that is definitely another thing to be aware of. In addition, know how large the footprint of the deep strike models are. And there's a good chance that you won't have to screen exactly 18 inches between those two models, because if it's like 17 inches, a 1-inch base might fit, but I know 4 Death Shroud Terminator bodies are not going to fit within that space. It's because they're much larger than that if they're using the 18-inch deep strike, of course. So understand the amount of space that unit takes up, and you should be able to screen it out just a little bit more effectively than you would believe. In addition, you don't have to screen directly at 9 inches to each and every board edge. Just remember the size of the unit and see how much they can put right there. I oftentimes ask my opponents, always make sure that it's okay with your opponents, but have them place their models down where you think they want to deep strike, and then see how much you actually need to deep strike, or how much you actually need to screen in order from preventing that deep strike to happen. Oftentimes you'll get just a little bit more movement than you thought you initially had, and you are still preventing them from being in the spot that they would like to be. If I'm going to write a Tyranid list right now that is going to combat the competitiveness of the current meta, there's 2 detachments that I think really stick out to me right now that lean into our strengths and also offer for a good amount of board control, which is really strong against Knights and Death Guard. And those 2 detachments are going to be, of course, Subterranean Assault and Vanguard Onslaught. Subterranean Assault, it's the new hotness. It's our new detachment that came out, I guess, almost 2 months ago at this point. I think it's very strong. I definitely think it's a detachment that you need a lot of reps with, and you need to be comfortable with your list. I will probably do an updated video on Subterranean Assault after I get just a couple more games in with it to make sure I'm comfortable with it. It offers for, of course, a whole lot of board control. You can be almost anywhere you want to be at any time with this detachment, and that means you are able to activate with your very, very strong units into the exact units that they want to. Oftentimes in a game of 40k, you'll say, okay, I'm going to use this unit to kill my opponent's X unit, and then your opponent just moves that unit to the other side of the table, and then your X Grand or Tyranids or whatever you had that was supposed to be activating into that is no longer able to activate into that. Subterranean Assault gets rid of that. You can teleport through tunnels, you can pick stuff up at the end of your opponent's phase and then bring it back in. You can get a 6-inch charge, you can get very crazy angles for shooting at it, and it just offers for a lot of gameplay that allows your units to activate in the way that you want them to. I think it's very strong, and once it's figured out, I don't think the the quote unquote solved list is out there yet with Subterranean Assault. A lot of people are experimenting with different things, but once it is figured out for sure, I definitely think that this detachment has the potential to be near the upper end of the meta. A lot of people are experimenting around with things like Hive Guard. I think Hive Guard could be interesting, and that is a nice meta adaptation, because Hive Guard are very okay-ish into Knights. I don't really want to say that they're good, because still offering your opponent 4-up saves, they're still going to make half of their saves, and sometimes they'll swing upwards. But it is definitely an interesting unit to try out in a detachment like Subterranean Assault. Just put a bunch of buffs on them and see what they can do. Talking about Vanguard Onslaught, Imperial and Chaos Knights really don't like to be move blocked where they want to be able to go where they want to go. And we did a defeat your enemy or destroy your enemy video recently with my buddy Morgan on Imperial Knights. If you want to hear us go in depth on how to move block and kind of corral Imperial Knights or Chaos Knights or really any big moving army that is definitely a good video to check out. I think Vanguard Onslaught has a really good potential at doing that, with lots of forward infiltrating units and scout moving gene stealers just being able to be up in your face turn one and not allow for your opponent to move where they want to be. That strategy works with Death Guard as well. You know, if you run at Death Guard, I don't think they love to be pressured too much. You still have to very carefully pick your engagements, because Death Guard definitely outtrade Tyranids right now. Their points are very efficient. So you have to be careful with your engagements. But I think if Death Guard are pressured in a way where they're not able to perfectly respond with their Death Strike Terminators or with their important units, it could be a bad time for them. So that is another reason why I think Vanguard Onslaught would be good. Same thing with Subterranean Assault. You know, Subterranean Assault is able to put pressure on armies that a lot of other armies are not able to. So if you're really looking to tech into the current meta and have a fighting chance into some very spooky lists, I would look at these two detachments and kind of go from there. And understand with Tyranids, the goal should not always be to kill every single model on the table. It's not what we're good at. The goal should be controlling the board, dictating the score, and just going from there. Wrapping everything up, let's talk about meta consistency. And I think the only thing that really is consistent about the meta is that it changes. So if you're not enjoying this meta, Tyranids are having a really hard time. And so if you're not really enjoying it, you know, I just want to remind you that this meta is the current meta, and it will not be the forever meta. Games Workshop really does value players enjoying their game. And I think there's a lot of dissent on the internet suggesting that maybe they don't. But I genuinely think they do. And I think if there is a space in the meta where there's a large portion of players are not able to play the game in which they want to play it and how they want to play it, I think that a change will be fixed. You know, a change will be implemented probably sooner than later. I would find it hard to believe that Games Workshop will leave the meta at its current state all the way until September, which is the projected time for their next data slate, if they are going by their traditional calendar of data slates. I would be surprised if they really hold off and don't make a change all the way until September. I could see a change happening relatively soon, in my opinions. In addition, you know, and even if that doesn't happen today or tomorrow or next week or a couple of weeks, or if I'm wrong and it doesn't happen until September, I love this game. I think this game is incredible, but also understand that you are never forced to play a game of 40K. You know, if the meta or the matchup is something that you just really don't think you're going to enjoy, you know, do some hobby. Take some time, paint some models that you're really excited about playing, and maybe just don't play those specific matchups, especially if you're playing pickup games. And, you know, don't be rude about it to your friends. Don't call them names because they play Imperial Knights or Chaos Knights or Death Guard or whatever. But just, you know, maybe find matchups or people that you enjoy playing that play different armies, so that you can feel like maybe it's a little bit more fair. Tournaments are a little bit harder to do that, but understand when you're going into a tournament, you are, you know, almost signing a social contract of, I understand the meta at its current state. I'm okay playing into the meta at its current state. And if I get paired into those meta armies, I'm going to do my best and try not to be too upset. You know, if I get curb stomped by Imperial Knights, because if you're going to a tournament, odds are you would like to win games, and your opponents are also going to win games as well, or want to win games as well. So they're going to do their best, just like you are going to do your best. But not to persuade people not to play the game, but there's a quote. When people play Dungeons and Dragons, I played quite a bit of Dungeons and Dragons. People say there's no D&D is better than bad D&D. And I think this applies here. So if you are not enjoying going up against Imperial Knights or Chaos Knights or Death Guard or armies that you really don't think you have a chance or are going to have a productive, positive experience playing, you don't have to play them, you know. But I will say, even all of this, I'm still very much enjoying the game, and I have full faith that there's going to be a positive change to the meta very, very soon. All right, everybody, that is it for today's video, talking about the spookiness of the meta and what kind of things we can do as Tyranid players and our mindset in adjusting to this meta and preparing ourselves for very strong competitive games of Warhammer 40K. If you liked this video, please write in the comments below that you are the #1 Psychophage fan, because I'm looking at my Psychophage right now and I love him. He looks beautiful. So make sure you encourage your Psychophage just as well as mine. Check out our stream tomorrow night. I'm playing 5 Norns. It's going to be a good time playing against some world leaders as well. Enter that giveaway and have yourself a lovely rest of your day, week, year, and life. Bye. See you Wednesday.